So, welcome back to the Sharon Fitzmaurice podcast. And today is episode 95. And we have a wonderful guest to introduce and share her wonderful knowledge with you all. Firstly, I just want to say a really big thank you to everybody that listened to first my live on Instagram, but then when I shared it as a podcast, it was just amazing the response coming back and talking about my mental health and me. I'm always very open about my story. And one of the reasons I created this podcast was to share not just what I've experienced and overcome in my life, but what other people are out there in the world sharing their expertise, wisdom, and knowledge with all of you to help you in your daily lives. So, again, I am so grateful for all your support, and I look forward to sharing many more stories in the weeks and months to come. So for today, my guest is Cathy O'Byrne, who is an experienced and accredited child and adolescent psychotherapist and play therapist, and now specialising in compassionate and empowering parent support. I love that. Cathy has worked as a primary school teacher, trainer, facilitator, and psychotherapist in various settings. She works from a systemic, integrative, and humanistic perspective, using creative approaches to resource and empower parents towards greater awareness, confidence, knowledge, and presence in their parenting. And there's so much more we're going to share about Cathy, but for now, let's welcome her onto the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. My first ever podcast.
I love that. And, I suppose, again, as adults, and we're going to come on to children and parenting and all of that. But as adults, we still experience new things in our own lives that cause us a little bit of fear, anxiousness, and it might trigger our own insecurities and all of those things. So for me, it's really important as us as adults, even in the work that we do, Cathy, to say that we also feel those feelings. And I always say to honor them and to say, instead of focusing on, oh my God, what am I doing? But again, as I said to you, it's like looking on the balance side of it and saying, that we all need a little bit of fear in our lives to motivate us to do something different, because otherwise we'd always just keep doing the same things over and over again.
That's it. It can be healthy to feel it and to push yourself a little bit too. My little fear guy is here behind me, actually. I have all my feelings with me today.
Oh, that's lovely.
And but it's normal to feel a little bit anxious or unsure when you're about to do anything new or novel or, anything you haven't done before. And it is important, like you say, to just name it and normalize it and honor it. I think it goes a long way towards regulating the feeling as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that brings us on to your amazing work. And I love the words in your bio, the creative approaches to resource and empower parents towards greater awareness, my favorite word ever, confidence, knowledge, and presence in their parenting. As a parent myself, and I have 2 adult children now, and I wish I had a Cathy O'Byrne years ago when I was struggling as a young parent. And for me, Cathy, I suppose the way I looked at it, and this is something I want to kind of lean into maybe a little bit today, as I spoke, about my own story, and I'm very open about it. Mm-hmm. Then as a young parent, I feel like a lot of our triggers and anxieties are brought up when we become a parent, and that we start feeling guilty or not as good as other parents. And instead of seeking support, a lot of parents will keep quiet about it in fear of judgment, or that, someone will look at them as if they're a bad parent. But I think every parent struggles, Cathy, don't they?
I think so. I think it's such a part of the human experience, but especially of the parental experience. And I think it's grand when you're doing it in your head. I was really good at it when I was doing it in my head with my imaginary children. And I suppose my background at the time was primary teaching. So I was used to having 36 kids in my charge and looking after them. And I don't think anything prepared me for how stressful it was going to be, how traumatic it would be to actually give birth. And I felt very lonely in it. I think because I was, I suppose, such a high achiever and a bit of a perfectionist, that made it really hard actually to say, oh, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And I think, I put a lot of pressure on myself at the time as well to be getting it right and to be doing it perfectly. And what even is that? And I suppose, look, my son is 19 now, so I escaped the early days of social media with him, and I'm glad for that, because I think that adds a whole other layer of pressure and complexity. But I think parents do feel a pressure to be projecting these images of perfection and having it right all the time and it feeling easy. And I honestly believe, Sharon, you'll get no greater teacher in your life than your own child. I really believe it's like the most powerful mirror ever being reflected back at you. You'll find buttons you didn't even know that you had getting pushed. You're all the time meeting yourself and the work that you might need to do to heal and get to know your triggers. And for that, I'm so glad and so grateful, but it's hard going. And I love having honest conversations about it. I think that's really important, that we don't put too much or so much energy into faking it until we make it, if you know what I mean.
I don't think I could ever. That was one of the things. I could never fake it because, well, maybe I'm just too honest, but my children, and just as you said it, I smiled so much, Cathy, because I always said my children were my greatest teachers, and they still are. They're still teaching me every day. But you know what? The honest conversations, my children are so honest, and my eldest son in particular will tell me exactly how I am showing up.
Mine too.
Yeah, and sometimes I look at him and go, oh my God, why did I get you to speak your mind so openly?
Same, yeah. Oh, and this will be the undoing of me. But and then you'd be very proud of it at the same time, that they can hold their own and set a boundary and be respectful and be in tune. But yeah, my guy's pretty honest as well. Like, I say, Mom, you're being a bit extra there now, or and he's so forgiving as well. Like, he's so unconditional. I think that's where I learned to be unconditional, actually, was from his love and acceptance and playfulness. But the honesty is really, really important. And I think just not to put pressure on yourself, to just really, and to bring in as much self-compassion for yourself as you possibly can. I know when I went and trained initially in play therapy and then psychotherapy, I thought, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know this. And I'm after getting it all wrong. And I have to, and there is a danger, and I actually, I feel a bit, the word that's come to me is concern. So I'm going to use it, but there's a lot of that now at the moment. You should do this and you shouldn't do that. And you should say this like this and you should never. There's a lot of shoulding happening, which is in a very, natural trip switch for guilt or something to kick in. Whereas I suppose I really tried to approach it from the fact, look, I know this now, so I'm going to try and do this now or use this now. And I brought it into my work with parents more and more. But initially, I had used a naughty step and all the things that were happening at the time. And, they never felt right, though. That was the thing. I used to sit with him on the step and talk to him. So I was probably instinctively doing time in without having a name for it. But I suppose, we're very locked into what do we need to do to children or with children to get them to behave, when really it's a relational piece and it's about learning to work with them and learning to work with what works for them, I suppose. But it's such a funny journey, the more you know. But all you can do is try and integrate it into your own way of being, learn from it, and then hopefully share your experience or your own kind of knowledge or trust in it, I suppose, through time and through the benefit of hindsight as well.
Yeah. And I think, again, as parents, when we know better, we'll do better. But again, as you said to all the parents out there, including myself, it's not to feel bad for not knowing how to do it the first time. And especially when it's maybe your first child and you learn a little bit better with your second child. And I know people that have gone on to had 5 and 6 kids, and I think, oh my God, you must have really learned by the sixth one. And they go, sometimes not, but we're still
Yeah.
trying. And I think as well, for parents, just what you said, it is so true. There is so many, posts out there and saying this is the way to be the best parent and this is what you should do. And if you do something else, then you're wrong. And I don't agree with that. And I think for all of us, we are doing our best with, the information we have, with the awareness we have, and that parents really want to do the best for their children. But I think there is, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm always saying this kind of a lot more now. There is a huge amount of influences around children and parents in their lives that we didn't have, as you said, in the early days of having our children with social media and a lot of comparison. But I think even children are coming home from school now. What I've heard from some young moms and dads, children are coming home, to their parents going, well, their mom and dad did this with them, and their mom and dad brought them here, and they bring them doing this, and they're at all their football matches, and, and then the parents are at home feeling guilty because they may have a different type of career where their hours aren't 9 to 5, or they can't go to the football matches sometimes, or they can't bring them to all these extra curriculum activities, or they don't have the financial means to do it.
Yeah.
How do we get, I don't know, we can't stop it, but what can other parents at home teach their children or show their children or guide their children to help them, even going, and I used to say to my children, if they got a new pair of runners, you know, and of course, kids are so funny. They'll go in and someone will say, your runners are lovely. And they'll tell them how much they paid for them or how much their parents paid for them, where they got them. And then you see children going home to their parents, the other children going, well, they paid €25 or €125 for their runners. And I got mine for €5 in pennies. I want the 125 pair. That's a lot of pressure on parents.
It is. And I think somehow the influences and the benchmarks have almost become external to the family unit, because we are comparing, or we are, listening to what's going on in other families. And I think for me, it was always the most important thing to stay connected to my own values in parenting. And my values would be very much back to basics, simplicity, quality over quantity. I parented alone actually for a lot of my son's life, so I wouldn't have had the capacity or the means financially or energetically either, teaching full time and studying, to be doing a lot of those things. And yeah, I think you have to do a lot of work around it, that, what's important to me and what's my goal here, in terms of long-term parenting. What kind of a human am I hoping to raise? What would I like my child to say about their childhood? I remember reading a book called Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Cohn, and he posed that question at the very start. And I remember reading it and thinking, a lot of parents don't get time or make time to actually think about this stuff, because you're thrown in at the deep end. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
You basically survive it as best as you can. And you're sort of in it, and it can feel a bit like a hamster wheel, and then you're onto a new stage with a new challenge. But a lot of the time we don't actually sit and think about what's important to me here. What are my values in this? How do I want to show up as a parent? And I think somehow maybe, again, I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe we've made that very external instead of going more into ourselves and into our own intrinsic kind of values and goals and our own personhood, really. And I think that then can create a disconnect between what's instinctively in us, and I think we're all quite instinctual beings when it comes to parenting, and just letting that outer stuff kind of drown out, what our gut is telling us, or what our hearts are telling us, or what we know ourselves deep down, when we can quieten it all and just go in and check in and see where we get, or see what we hear, or see what we feel. But I think that outside influence is very powerful. It can be beneficial, I suppose, if you know how to harness it for your own good, or think about it critically, in terms of how it applies to you or how it fits for you. And I think a big part of it for me would be just monitoring the impact that it's having on my own mental health. So I regularly take breaks from my phone, turn it off. If you're not feeling good after looking at something, that's a pretty good sign. It might not be for you, I think it has very positive potential impact, but I think you need to be keeping an eye on the impact that it's having on you, as a person and as a parent. But I think, somehow we've made it very externalized, and maybe that's because it's lonely, and it's isolating, and they do say that it takes a village to raise your family, and people might not always have that, so they probably look outside of themselves for it. But for me, it has always been about coming home to me as a mom, and checking in, and it never sends you far wrong, I don't think, if you can stay connected to what you believe and what's important to you as a parent. Does that make sense?
That's so important. And again, I love that you said that, what do you value? Because I would always say that just as an individual, as myself, without being a parent, like, what do I value? What are my values today? It doesn't have to be the same every year, but it's change. Yeah. And even your values as a parent, what once, the values were keeping your child safe and warm and everything. And as they grow, they change, because we want to raise, as you said, good human beings. We want them to be kind and compassionate to themselves and others, be respectful, but we want them to have courage and a voice and to be able to stand up for themselves and others, so again, it's a balance in all of that. But coming back to you, Cathy, and raising your son on your own, because I know that will be very important to some of my listeners that may be raising a child or children on their own now as well. And I always found on the days when I was finding it extremely tough for myself that I almost waited for my husband to come home so I could just throw it all out on top of him, and that it was lovely to have somebody, even though I was like the dumping of it all, I didn't have to carry it. So how is that as a single mother? How was it for you as a single mother, having, maybe not that other adult in partnership with you, that you could have that other person to either calm you down, to, oh, don't be silly, you're doing great, or even just to take the child for an hour so you could just sit on your own?
Yeah, it was intense. It was full on. And it didn't happen until my son was 3. So there was some kind of co-parenting pieces to be figured out. But I think you parent very differently when you're by yourself for most of the week, 24/7. It's quite intense. I would have had a lot of support from my own family, from my parents in particular. Where would we be?
Yeah.
And I suppose, I started off in motherhood very, very anxious. I was thinking about this when I was kind of reflecting on today. I was trying to trace it back to where did it start? Where did it start where you didn't feel enough or good enough? And it actually started before I left the hospital, would you believe? So I would have had my son at kind of 1:41 in the morning, and I'd had an epidural, so I was moved back down to a semi-private room, and we were in the bed, the two of us, because I had the epidural, and I remember having the loveliest time with him, telling him stories about everybody, about me, about his dad, about our families, about how excited we were that he was here. And I remember talking to him for a long time into the night, and we must have fallen asleep. But I woke about 9 o'clock the next morning, and he wasn't beside me. He was in the crib. And of course, I wasn't supposed to get out of the bed. And I thought, how did he get there? And a nurse came into me and she said, oh, you were snoring so loudly. I thought you were going to smother him. So I put him into the crib. And, you know, I can smile at that now, and I can have compassion for myself and say, Jesus, Cathy, like, you were exhausted. It was an induced labor. It was going on for ages. Of course you fell asleep. But that was the start of, you know, oh, I've done something wrong here already. Someone else had to step in. Do you know, I can't describe, it was a horrible feeling, and it set me on edge. So within 12 hours, it was there. I was breastfeeding as well. That wasn't going well. He was starting to get a little bit jaundiced. And I think for me, it was very anxiety provoking because I couldn't see how much he was actually taking in. And the jaundicey bit was sort of leading to, you might need to stay a bit longer in here. And I was like, no, that's not happening because I had been moved into a ward at that stage, and I couldn't sleep because I was paranoid about my snoring and I wasn't getting any rest. So I said to them, look, I'd like to try him with the bottle. And the other thing was, I had asked for help from a lactation nurse, and what I got wasn't help, if you know what I mean. It didn't empower me to be able to do it myself. So I suppose I didn't feel confident about it. So out came the bottle anyway. And within hours, he had kind of wind and colicky pains. And a night nurse said to me, oh, you're going to regret taking him off the breast. So that's 2 now in the space of about 36 hours. So yeah, I just remember feeling very, oh my gosh, this huge responsibility. How am I going to do this? And of course, like, nobody talks to you about recovering from the trauma of giving birth. You're expected to just
get up and get going.
Get on with it. Yeah. And I was in tatters, as they say. So yeah, I remember the jaundice and the colic and thinking, oh shit, now I've made the wrong call, and oh, what do I do? And I just didn't know what to do. So it sort of set me up for having to get it right and wanting to get it right. And I met a level of anxiety, Sharon, in myself that I didn't even know I had in me when I became a mum. I really didn't. And I remember asking my parents to mind him when he was small, and I was so serious at the time. I had written out like a list of instructions. And my dad was like, my mum was like, okay, love, I think she knew. And my dad was like, are you serious? Like, we had 4 of you and you're all still standing. But I was like, but you've never minded that's how seriously I was taking it,
Yeah.
very, very seriously, and really wanted to get it right. Spent every Saturday pureeing papayas and things I never heard of because I thought, this is how it looks. This is what you're meant to be doing. So I suppose, yeah, when I was on my own, that was very painful and, obviously not planned. And, you're trying to go through that as well. And, you're mindful of the impact on your child. But yeah, I suppose my family, my parents just rallied around me and I got through it. I think for me, the hardest part around that time would have been the emotional overwhelm, when the stress builds up. And like you say, there isn't somebody immediately there to tag in and, blowing your top as a parent and feeling horrendous after it. And I'm very good at repair. That's the upshot of that. I'm very confident in my ability to repair. And like I was saying, my son is very unconditional, but it was hard, like teaching full time. And I did decide to go back and study when he was about 6. And I met a new partner around that time. So that was kind of a slow introduction into his life. But yeah, it's full on. And I think it's you parent very differently when it's just you. I think it's very intense. It's very connected. It's very close, but it's a lot happening dynamically then, if you know what I mean. But I had great support and still do. And I think it's great as well, to have extended family involved, where it works and where it's beneficial.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is the support. And if there was another thing you could add for any single parents that are out there now supporting, their own well-being and the real well-being of a new child or a young child, what other advice would you give them, Kathy?
Oh, I think, if I could go back in time, I just would have said to myself, you are enough. Like, you don't need to be worrying like this. You're stressing yourself out. You are everything your child needs you to be and more. And you just need to focus on the things that you're doing. I was focused on, oh, I was a bit cross, or oh, I was focusing on what I thought wasn't good enough or wasn't coming kind of naturally, whereas there was so many other things that I was doing. And I suppose we have a saying in play therapy where you're to focus on the donut and not the hole, all the things that
Yeah.
are going on around it. And parents do a million billion unseen kind of acts of love and tenderness and care and holding kids in their minds. So yeah, I think to me, I would have just said, don't sweat it, and I really did enjoy it. And
Mm.
really loved the bonding and the cocooning and I used to just sit and cuddle him for hours, and that didn't bother me that the house was falling down around me. I would have been quite relaxed in that way.
Mm.
But it was just the enormity of the responsibility and, the the overwhelm that can come, all the decisions you're trying to make. So yeah, I think going gently on yourself is really important, really honoring that you are enough, more than enough. And I think for me, learning to bring in a lot more self-compassion was key, because I would be quite hard on myself. I expect a lot of myself. I've no problem giving that to other people, but it's not always easy for me to give it to myself. So yeah, just to say, don't sweat it, go gently. And we are like all they need. Do you know what I mean? We have
Yeah.
it in us, we just don't always trust in
Yeah.
what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like, he's 19 now. We are close, we talk a lot. We have a lot of trust, we have a lot of safety, we have a lot of playfulness. I think I'm probably most myself with him. Like, I'm
Yeah.
completely, it's different. Like, yeah, it's just, we're still very playful, still very, be going around messing and singing and just having the crack. And, we can talk when we need to talk about big stuff. We're able to relax. We're able to give each other space, and, we're able to be human together as well.
Mm.
And repair as well. I think, it's,
Yeah. Going back and saying, I was wrong, I made a
yeah,
mistake, I'm sorry for shouting, you
yeah.
know. And I think that's what it is. And I love that, the honesty. And I think it is to be honest with your children,
Mm.
that you don't always know the best thing to do. It seems
No,
right at the moment, or you thought
mm,
it might have been better that way, but then you
yeah,
may have learned afterwards it wasn't. And that you're able to come back that and say to your children, not like, many parents years ago were told, well, I said it and that's the way it is.
and I can't lose face now. I have to
No.
pull it up, even though, and I think that's really good modeling for kids, to let them see we have reflective capacity too. We do what we think is right in the moment, then we might think otherwise. And, I think that's a healthy thing to teach kids, that it is okay to change your mind if something doesn't fit or feel right or feel safe. Um, because, like, we are just winging it, and we're doing the best we can. And you,
Absolutely. And you know what it is? It's an amazing journey. I know it can be quite hard, and especially as we're starting out as new parents. But I think we do focus, as you said, on the whole, on the things that are going wrong, and we forget about all the wonderful things that are going right. And to hear your child laughing and playing and sitting there, sometimes, as you said, you'd be cuddling them. And I loved when they started sitting on the floor and started using their imagination and making up little things in their head. Just watching that world of beautiful imagination and curiosity, that I started seeing the world through their eyes as they were growing as well. And that opened up something so beautiful inside of me. So again, if we have time to be sitting more present, because it is the awareness around that for me. Like, how do I feel when I'm sitting here? As you said, the house could be falling apart. I have a lot of work to do, but this moment is so precious. Just sit and enjoy it for a few minutes before you put the pressure
Favorite.
on yourself. Yeah.
Favorite. And it's amazing because what they remember, what stands out for them, usually in my experience from, being a parent and from working with many, many, many kids over the years, they savor the simple, they savor the connected, they savor golden quality relational moments. They're very often, the big fancy days that come and go, that parents put a lot of energy into. That's not what they remember. They'll remember going out and making a s'more outside, on a disposable barbecue. They'll remember going out and snuggling up on blankets out in the back garden. They'll remember, having their dinner in the sitting room on the floor some evening. They won't remember much about what was, external. They'll remember the way it felt and the connection and the quality of that. And I think even just knowing that helps to let go of the pressure of this has to be bells and whistles now, and it has to be, all singing, all dancing. But just from talking to kids as a teacher and as a therapist, that's not what they hold on to. It's not what their core memories are kind of made of. And I think that's reassuring for parents on some level to know that they're only really looking and needing quality connection from us. And for that to happen, I suppose we have to do maybe a little bit of work on letting go of busyness in our minds or, external pressures, and just allowing ourselves to follow their wonder or their awe or their curiosity, or just being there with them. It's powerful to just slow down and be with them,
Yeah. And I think what it is for a lot of parents maybe is the busyness and the external stuff. And I call it stuff because at the end of the day, what is really important. And for parents to, and this is what I love, you've created parenting pods and you're helping parents. I love that, a parenting pod. I want to go and sleep in a parenting pod. But I think it's just to give parents, because I think parents do feel helpless at times. They feel helpless in their role as a parent or in who they are themselves. So for me, it's valuing that connection, with themselves and feeling safe in it, in a place like a parenting pod with somebody like you, Cathy, that is saying to them, you know what, you're doing great, really. But they've been talking themselves down for so long. And then, as I said, their other triggers and patterns they keep showing up as their child is developing and growing. And they keep telling themselves they're not good enough. And that then affects their relationship with their child. So tell us more about your beautiful parenting pods, Cathy.
So I suppose they were kind of percolating for a long time, if that makes sense. And they had kind of, I suppose, the seed for them, if you like, were various different workshops that I had been running in my playroom a couple of years back. So some of them would have been one-off workshops, and some of them would have been maybe 4-week or four-part parenting courses where we would really kind of dig into unconditional parenting and kind of conscious parenting approaches with skills that were integrated. And we were leaving gaps of kind of a fortnight for people to try out what they'd been learning and come back and let us know how they were getting on. But they were powerful. That group experience is so beneficial, for parents to feel not so alone, not so isolated, and that a lot of the struggles we're all facing and dealing with as parents are universal, actually. So they were coming to an end, and parents were saying, but where will we go now? But where will we go now? And at the time, my practice was at capacity. I was at capacity, probably a bit overstretched, if I'm being honest about that. And they were in my mind for a while because I thought, it'd be lovely to hear how parents are getting on. And I had taken different measures as part of my master's research collection for the dissertation and things. So they were percolating for a while, and then COVID hit, and I think I found it very challenging to be a therapist in that time because, I hadn't had to support as many clients when collectively we were all going through the same stressors. So that sort of made me reevaluate actually what was happening in my own work and what was happening with my own nervous system, if you know what I mean. So I would have gone back in, I think it was after the second lockdown, kind of March 2021. And I had made a decision that I was going to try and wind down the private one-to-one child part of my work for a little while. So there's a few reasons for that. It was really just the influx of calls of parents who were looking for support. I found it so hard to tell them, look, I don't have any space and my waiting list is closed. And the parenting part of the work was something that I would have always been really passionate about. And I saw the impact of it when we spent time on it. So I started to think, okay, how can I try and meet these needs? And also, I believe parents have massive, untapped, unconscious potential to help their children and support their children at home. And I really believe that it's important to try and help them to connect with that and to see that. So I started to think, okay, I can diversify. And we had a move, actually, our family relocated. So that was all in the pipeline. So I decided I'd offer the individual support for parents who wanted it, but then that the pods could be created in a kind of an issue-based way or a stage-based way to help parents who had things in common to kind of come together and learn from each other. And it was interesting because it's not a course as such. It's not a me talking for the hour and a half. There is a little bit of, we'll say, prescriptive or directive or psychoeducational input, but they're a lot about reflection and learning from each other and learning a little bit about what's going on in their child's brain or nervous system and learning to look at what's happening in their own as well. So they're semi-structured, but they're not a course, if that makes sense. They're supportive spaces that and they're closed, I suppose, once they start. But yeah, the idea is that if we don't have a village or a tribe, could we make it together for a little while and see how that feels and how that helps? And I think, parents have an awful lot of knowledge and expertise and things that they're doing that are working that, they don't even realize are valuable to other parents. They'll often start with this thing. They'll say, we do this thing in our house. We do this thing. And in our house, we have this thing we do. And, they've all these lovely little rituals or creative little ways to support their child or their children. And, they're just, because parents are so creative and resourceful, on the ground, they're thinking on their feet, winging it. And I've found it so valuable actually for other parents to learn, from each other in that way. And for the validation that comes for the parent that's sharing what's helpful. And also, I suppose it's great for their confidence as well, that it's not somebody talking, at you for a couple of, do this and do that. It's let's try and learn together. Let's try and understand ourselves a little bit differently as parents, and every time I do a pod, I do it as a parent, I'm there too, reflecting and trying to do the work myself. But I think there's something very powerful about learning from each other in that way. And so there are bits of it that are, skill-based and psychoeducational, but it's a lot around just sharing and having a place to put it. And I found that a very powerful experience actually with the groups, just that whole, you're not on your own, you don't need to be on your own. You have what you need inside of you. We just need to help you to connect with it, in a little bit of a stronger way. And the fact then that there's continuity as well, I think is really
No, I think that's lovely, because I know even, say, years and years ago, and there was parent and toddler groups, and it was to let the toddlers run around, but it was really for the mammies or the daddies to come together and go, oh my God, I'm exhausted, and you'd see parents then going, I'll take your little one for a little while. because they'd want to support each other, because they knew how it felt. And if someone was struggling, that they went to the group and they weren't afraid to show up, even though they were struggling and saying, I was finding it hard. Where there was other people that wouldn't go because they didn't want anybody to see them struggling in case they would have been judged. So I love the fact of the parenting pod where you show up because, as you said, there's things you're doing that are really good that might help another parent. Like, oh God, I never thought of that. That's a brilliant idea. And you made me think about, Cathy, one of the things another mom told me years ago when my kids were quite small and she had teenagers. And she said, when they become teenagers, things change, she said, and they won't talk to you as much. And my children never stopped talking. And I was like, I couldn't imagine that. And then for a minute, I was saying, it would be nice if they stopped just for a little while, not realizing, that age. And when my eldest was 14, it was like the switch, it was like one day he was this happy, chatty lad, and the next day he was quieter and I thought secretive and wanted to spend more time on his own. But then I realized, no, you're just like every other teenager. You're trying to find your own place in your world and come away from the mammies and daddies or whatever a little bit. But the thing she said to me was, if you just all sit down together and have your meal, she said, and if you just make it, this is the time. Now, it mightn't always happen in every household, but if you could have maybe 2 or 3 days where you do sit down together and no phones, no nothing, and, no distractions. And she said, they might come down all grumpy and, oh my God, and whatever. But eventually, that's where they'll start kind of sharing their day, because as teenagers, they come in from school. How was your day? Anything the matter? What went on today? And their head is just so full and they're going, leave me alone. So that's being home in the car if they didn't get the bus home is a nice way to kind of connect and be with them. But if they need space, which we all need space after a busy day, is at the dinner table or wherever it's going to be for you, and to just sit and let everyone just be. And it was one of the biggest things in our family's lives was through all the stages, kind of as they were getting older. And they always did from young, and they were used to it. So as a teenager, it was just normal. But they started to share where they wouldn't share maybe after school or later on when they were tired or whatever. And I just thought I was so grateful that she had told me that.
And I think, when they come in from school, like they're on at school all day, they're being asked question after question after question after question by various different teachers, at secondary level. And very often when they get into the car, they're met with more questions from the parent, who's trying to check in. And that's sometimes the last thing that they want or feel able to answer. So sometimes they do need that bit of space, and I think it's important to try and have those kind of connected rituals as a family, where they're part of everything and welcome to be there and share. And I think food is great to connect with teenagers. Any child, really, they love the grub, like.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just even to make an extra effort or, make something that, they like and just spend the time together and just energetically let them feel, I know you need your space, but I'm still here and I'm still thinking of you. And I think that's really interesting that, people know to expect a change, at certain stages in kids' development and teen development, but they don't always know what's normal, what's typical, what's the best thing that I can do, how can I mind myself. And, there are various things that go on up through children's development from baby to teen that, are quite normal parts of their transition. There are normal sort of conflicts they need to work through. And so a lot of what they're showing in terms of behavior, it's very normal kind of representation of how they work through the struggle, but even learning about that in a group can be really, really helpful as well. And I suppose like that stage, the teen stage, or even other stages in your own childhood, depending on your own story or your own history, can be particularly triggering. And like I found the early teen stage quite triggering as a parent because it was so different and so it had changed a lot. The feelings were a lot bigger. They were a lot more intense. And I remember thinking, I can't do 5 years of this. And I remember going to my own mom and saying, oh my God, and I suppose I had found being a teenager quite hard myself. So, there were bits of it that were fairly confronting. And I think even just having a place where you can have a look at that with somebody, try and understand it a little bit differently, is going to change the way you respond to it. And if if you're not aware of the triggers for you or the potential challenges, there's every chance you might keep reacting to it, whereas if you're looking at it differently or understanding it a little bit differently and moving into it, with a little bit more awareness and skills, I suppose, because it all comes down to communication, really. At the end of the day, it can help things to go a little bit smoother. There's no such thing as smooth sailing, but I think it's about resourcing yourself and just understanding maybe the stage your child is at, what's going on for them, what kind of things are they trying to work out, what kind of things are typical to struggle with, and how you can kind of best support it. But yeah, I wouldn't like to be a teenager in this day and age now. I have to say it's hard. There's a lot going on for them. There's a lot coming at them. And I know, like, when we would walk to school, there was particular groups, that you wouldn't want to be meeting too often. Be kind of tricky energy coming from them, but you could go in home and you wouldn't have to see them till the next day. See, that you've got a break from it, you've got a bit of respite from it. Whereas with social media and their phones and I think that it's just coming at them all the time now. Their nervous systems are very much in fight, flight, and shut down as well. A lot of the time, it's just getting a lot for them. So yeah, I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of their experience and what they might be needing. I suppose trying to connect with any of the feelings yourself is always going to be helpful in terms of coming at it with more empathy than than reactivity, I suppose. But yeah, I wouldn't like to be a teenager now. I think it's just so hard for them.
I think it is hard. I know people close to me that have teenagers and younger children. And I only had a call last night from somebody who's 12-year-old, said they were going somewhere with a friend and the mom, but the mom wasn't there at all. The mom was invisible. And it was pushing out those boundaries, and wanting to be grown up. But they'd also done something else. They'd taken money without asking. And it was only a few euros, but still, they were absolutely devastated because here was their beautiful child who was always so good and so mannerly. And all of a sudden it was like, is this the start of it?
And that's the fear coming in again, isn't it? Yeah.
It is the fear, absolutely. So I would always say, look at your child, you've given them a good foundation, you've, given them the good values, all of those things, and they will push out the boundaries, but it is important, yes, to have the lines of communication open and, how do they feel afterwards? Like, what do they really need that they couldn't ask you for? But again, we're hearing there's again in teenagers, there's so many things they're dared to do by their friends, and they do it because we know of peer pressure, we know how hard it is, and they would rather suffer the consequences than be seen as not one of their peers. So there's a lot for parents and teenagers to have to contend with now.
There is, and the peer influence becomes far more important, as they develop. They're driven to try and find their tribe or where they belong. And, there's a bit of confusion around what does belonging look like and what does fitting in look like. And, there's a lot of figuring out that has to happen for them too, isn't there? But it's a tough time. And I was smiling listening to you because we all kind of did that. I'm staying in my friend's house.
Yeah. Cathy, what do you mean? Of course we know. I'm only joking. I did it as well.
One outfit on and you don't rock up to the wearing the same thing. And I think it's a time for pushing boundaries and asserting your own independence. And see, it's quite conflicted because they're trying to move away in one sense, but they still need parents for co-regulation and the emotional support. So it's like walking a tightrope, really. And it
I
can
think
go.
it is hard for parents though, because again, as you said, there's different stages, isn't there, from all the development stages up until, and they're reaching teenage level. And for me, it is a different level completely. It is something that no parent, I think, is ever prepared for.
Mm.
But that's why I think it's so important having parenting pods or parenting support groups around you, that you don't have to do it on, even if you're a single mother or father, even if you have a partner, even if you have extended family. Sometimes I think we are so emotionally attached that we can't see clearly. So it's nice to see it from an outside
Yeah.
perspective. Would you agree,
And
Cathy?
and sometimes you just can't see the wood for the trees when you're in it yourself. Sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
can take somebody to come and maybe reflect something or notice something. And even, you mentioned parent circumstances, sometimes parents are by themselves, sometimes parents are together, but coming at things from very different pages, very different experiences, very different value systems. So it can be challenging, on so many levels. But yeah, that idea that we're all kind of learning together, affirming each other, having compassion for ourselves and our kids and our own journey, I think, in it is really, but it can be really hard, when you're in it. You just can't see the wood for the trees. Sometimes you can get very stuck in the pattern of relating, or stuck in the rut of nagging or reacting, or any of it. And what I find a lot is parents want to change the pattern, but they just maybe don't know how, or might be fearful of, well, if I'm not going to be doing that anymore, in terms of punishment or consequence, what am I meant to do instead? So it becomes very much a doing thing rather than a being thing, and it's a relationship, it's something that takes work no matter what stage of it you're in or you're at. And I think, there are so many different ideologies out there around parenting. Like, it's very overwhelming, the amount of information, that people try and wade through and see what resonates for them. And then there's the judgment, which is next level. Everyone has an opinion about everyone else's parenting. So people feel almost that they have to defend, or that they have to, I suppose, really mind themselves around different people, maybe in their family or in their system. It's just, I don't think there's ever been a harder time to parent a child of any age. And I think we're more conscious now about well-being and emotional development, and, I suppose, inner child work and what can go on. And so we're trying to work, very proactively and preventatively. But some of us, and a lot of us, haven't kind of worked through our own stuff around that too. So, and when you're stressed, you go into default. You'll do what you know how to do, or what you saw, years ago. And that can just make it harder in the moment to kind of access and, doing things a different way. But I think it's probably never been more overwhelming. And so it's something I feel conscious about, even when you're putting stuff out on social media, that it should always be supportive and helpful, and not something that would be overwhelming or guilt inducing, or and I think people need to be able to look at things and think about them and take what resonates for them. Take what fits for them. Just getting back to ourselves and our own families and our own children and their needs and our needs as well. And our capacity as parents.
Yeah, and I think also really, as you're talking, Kathy, and it'll be obviously all parents listening and not the children to the podcast. And for the parents listening, that we all need to look after ourselves. And just even listening to you, I'm going back reflecting on, well, what ways was I reactive, to my children and what they were doing. And in all of my reactions, it was something within myself, that I felt lacking in something or not good enough. So, and even to have compassion with that, and that as you said, our children are mirrors to us, and they're there, and those beautiful little beings looking at us and smiling and screaming in tantrums if they want to,
Letting us
waking up in the
know.
middle of the
Yeah.
night, all of those things. They're not doing it to punish us as
Mm.
parents. They're doing it because they have needs that they're not able to express. And just because we don't know we don't have to react in a, I don't want to say a negative way, but a way, that this is so frustrating. Absolutely, everything is frustrating when you are exhausted and tired and you
And
don't get
feelings are
support.
messy. Feelings are
Messy. You don't
messy.
even know how you feel some days because you're so tired.
Yeah,
But
and if
maybe
you
just to
if
be
you weren't,
kinder.
that's it. And if maybe when you were younger, it mightn't have been safe or okay
Mm,
or altogether encouraged for you to let out your feelings. So like, there's something about emotional outbursts that can be really confronting for parents, especially if they are tired and they're
mm,
overwhelmed. And I suppose, going back to what you were saying about reactivity, like for me that was a lot about learning about
mm.
my stuff and my bits in it. And for me it was very often about basic needs. Like I mightn't have been to the loo, I mightn't have eaten, I might have
Yeah.
stayed up late trying to finish something for college, so I was operating on a reduced tank a lot of the
Mm,
time. And I think, learning about my own nervous system and what I need, to be well and to do well and work well has helped me a lot. Like
mm,
I'm actually making myself a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, now, because I can work around what I need to do. Whereas when I was working flat to the mat, I was just grabbing things here and there, and
you
I
weren't looking
wasn't, I
after you.
wasn't, I really wasn't, and I pushed myself,
Mm,
quite hard, and that gave me less capacity as well to respond to the needs of my own child as well. So you
mm,
just learn as you're going along that I need to mind myself so that I can do the best that I can do here. It's not fair to keep pushing yourself beyond your own capacity. And, I often think about, the fuel tank in the car and how far you push things, or, that
mm,
oxygen mask
yeah.
analogy, which I always thought sounded very counterintuitive as a
Yeah.
parent, but it makes sense because if you don't put yours on, you could end up in real bother. And I think parents are very self-sacrificing. They are inclined to put themselves last. They are inclined to put their children and other people's needs first. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have gotten a lot of healthy modeling around that. I never
Mm,
really saw my mom doing much for herself.
yeah.
She was always kind of busy doing things for everybody else. So, I think that's really important, for kids now to see their parents having an interest for themselves, doing things that nourish and
Mm,
sustain them and minding themselves as well. We're in
yeah.
it for the long haul. It's a
Yeah.
it's a marathon, not a sprint, although it feels like a sprint.
Yeah, well, it does in the early days, I think, because you're sprinting. You're
Well,
sprinting constantly just to, as you said, to
we're,
eat,
we're
to get a
trudging.
shower, all of those things. We're
That's
nearly up in our time, Cathy. It's just been so lovely. But you
it.
have obviously delivered loads of training and workshops for primary and secondary school communities on trauma-informed ways of teaching, relating to and supporting young people who have experienced trauma and childhood adversity. I think that's another day, another podcast, because there's a huge amount in that,
There's a
even
lot
from
in it.
my own personal experience. But what I love is you advocate very strongly for the power of the relationship when working with young people and their families. And I suppose, again, as parents, speaking just as parents on this podcast, we know now the power of relationships with our children, keeping the lines of communication open. But what it really brings me back to is the relationship we have with ourselves.
Mhm.
You know, how we speak in our own minds to ourselves, how we communicate our needs, how we're able to go back, and you use the word repair, being able to say, I didn't do right, I'm sorry, this is the way I did it, but I realize that's not the best way. And just being open to learning and being open to sharing,
Mm.
but also listening.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us as parents, we're still learning every day, even if we have adult children.
Mhm.
And now what I've learned to do is I just say to my husband sometimes, if my son says something, I'll say, I'm not taking it personally. You
And it
know,
isn't personal. Yeah, it feels it sometimes, but it isn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be, which when I was very triggered when they were smaller, everything hurt me because I didn't
Mm.
believe I was doing a good enough job. Now I know it's not personal. Like you said, they feel safe, so they can let it out at home. They can say the way they feel. And sometimes it explodes out of them because, again, as adults, they're still even trying to figure themselves in the world. And the world is a bit harder. And there's a lot of expectations, as you said, with social media and society and everything they have to go through. And I think we just need to soften everything down a little bit with ourselves, with our children, with our expectations of ourselves, and especially of them. And one of the lovely posts you had up was, I think I can't remember it exactly, but it, instead of asking or telling children who they should be, it's ask or what they want to be, who are they now?
Who they
I just
already
thought that
are.
was beautiful, Cathy.
Yeah, that's from Untamed, Glennon Doyle. That one stopped me in my tracks because I thought, they are who they are. They're right in front of us, and the I think the power of accepting that, and that paradoxical theory of change anyway, you need to accept something in
Yep.
yourself before you've ever got any hope of changing it. But again, should is there. Who do we think they should be? What do we think they should be doing, rather than focusing on our energy on embracing them and who they are and who they're showing us they are. And I think, we have to be able to do that for ourselves too. And that does mean bringing in that grace and that self-compassion and that acceptance of ourselves as messy humans. We're human and we're humble, and that's safer that we are. I don't think anybody's striving to be perfect or not willing to take risks or get things wrong. That's not great modeling for kids anyway. So I think it's brave to kind of move into that piece where you're very accepting of them and who they are, rather than that piece of falling into, well, it should look like this or it should feel like that. Or I think it's so simple, but it's so profound when you sit with it, I think.
But I think also the speaking about it and saying it, that's again the importance of sharing our stories. It's saying it in real life ways, not in, this is the way it's supposed to be, and the parenting book says this, and that parenting book says this, and there was a documentary on, and the children are so disturbed because of the parent, and oh my God, what if I'm like that? Instead of just looking at where you are and looking for support and going, I'm reacting to this all of the time. This is happening quite a lot. And then my child is acting this way all the time. And then somebody says, it's okay. It's okay. Let's just take one of those steps first.
Yeah, let's have a look at it. Let's try and
Yeah.
figure out what's going on, what's happening
Yeah.
for you, what might be happening for your child. And
Yeah.
we're inclined to look at it as kind of the tip of the iceberg. We're inclined to react to the behavior rather than looking at what's it trying to show us. And sure, our own behavior is the same.
Oh,
When we're, huffing and puffing and stomping around, we're trying to show something too, so it's all a bit sideways and indirect. But yeah, just getting a bit of support if it feels okay to or right to look at it differently and understand it differently. And and I suppose I aim to be really responsive and non-judgmental and accepting of parents and where they're at. And it's our work is very much paced by the parent, and very much kind of focused on what they need. So a lot of parents will say things like, oh, I feel like a weight's been lifted after we talk, which is a lovely thing to hear, because who wants to be walking around with the weight on their shoulders? Or I feel like I know what to do to get on track again. Or I love when they say, I understand my child a lot differently now. I never thought of looking at it like that. So I just think, isn't that great? And kids will benefit from this, because if they're getting that, they'll be able to go out and give that to other, people in their lives and their friends and things. So I think it's, I when you said you wished it was around when you were a young mom, I did too. Because I really felt this was way easier when it was an imaginary job.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I even imagined it either, even beforehand. I knew I was fearful about being a mom, but I thought when I saw my first child in particular and held him in my arms that, oh my God, I loved him so much that I was going to be a perfect mom until he started crying and, not sleeping and not
Good things.
eating,
Yeah.
getting sick all the time on top of me, and I couldn't have a shower and the house wasn't tidy. Real life, I used
Yeah.
to say, got in the way of me just sitting there loving him. But
Yeah.
that's the world. We can't do that. It's not normal just to sit there 24 hours a day loving them. We can do things and still love them, and not feel
Yes.
guilty about it. And we can have days when we're not feeling 100% and still love them. Because as you said, the most important thing for our children is to know that you are there for them, that you love them, and that they'll always have you, no matter what, and that you can share openly together as much as possible, or as much as they might want to share with you as they get
as much as
older.
they decide.
Yeah.
But your ears are available and you're safe.
Yes, I'm here waiting. My
That's it.
son
And
says,
you're a safe
stop
place for them
waiting.
to come
Yeah,
back to.
stop
Yeah, but
waiting. I'm not telling you all the details right now. And I just smile and go, he will tell me eventually.
when he's ready.
Cathy, so you have the Parenting Pods, online support space for parents to learn and grow, webinars around anxiety and coping skills, and all of these and more can be found on your website,
Right.
www.theswallowstrail.com. You're also on LinkedIn and Instagram at The Swallows Trail, and Facebook, The Swallows Trail Parenting Support.
Yeah, and I work with parents individually as well, parents who mightn't feel ready to go into a pod. So just to,
Very good.
yeah, thanks
And
so much.
lovely. So they can check out everything on your website. I'll be putting everything on the show notes as well. So they
Brilliant.
can click into the links. Please go over and follow Cathy's wonderful account. I'm connected to Cathy on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I love seeing her posts as well, because even though I don't have young children anymore, the posts are even reflective as parents of older children, because we're still forming our relationship. It's still, we might seem adult to adult, but we're still their parent. And I would love that relationship to continue and grow stronger as they move out into the world and explore it much more, and that they could ring me up from anywhere in the world to say, Mom, this is going on today, and I really need just to have a chat. That would mean so much to me. Mightn't mean as much to them, but just to know that they could just pick up the phone anytime would mean the world.
That's
that
it.
they feel safe
It's
telling
giving them their roots to come back to and their wings to fly, isn't it?
Yeah. Lovely. Cathy,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much.
It's been wonderful. So how was your experience of your first podcast?
It was great. It flew. It really flew. But you're so easy to talk to. You really put me at ease. So thank you for that. I was nervous.
Oh, you're welcome,
Thank you.
Cathy.
You're great.
It's lovely. I love conversations and just being able to empower parents, for them to feel like, oh, that I've listened to that and it's made me feel like I'm normal. I'm not too bad as a parent, but maybe I do need a little bit of support. Maybe I need to go and ask somebody about this, because it has been bothering me for some time, and I see it affecting my child or children, even my relationships. You know what? I really need to get support now, and not to leave yourself hanging and waiting, thinking it will
No,
get
and I think you don't need to be on your own with it. And if having chats like this could start to make you feel a little bit safer or a little bit less intimidating or stigmatizing, to just make a call and have a chat and see if it's for you, I think that'd be great, because it's lonely enough. We don't need to be on our own with it if we're open to joining in with a few other parents, I suppose, who are muddling along and trying to figure their way out.
Yeah. Lovely. Cathy O'Byrne, thank you so much
Thank
again
you
for
so
your
much,
time, your
Very good.
expertise and wisdom. And as I said, go and follow Cathy on at The Swallows Trail on Instagram, The Swallows Trail Parenting Support on Facebook, LinkedIn, Cathy O'Byrne, and her website, www.theswallowstrail.com. Thank you again for listening, and I look forward to connecting to you all again soon.